Hello. Some games quickly fade into obscurity, whilst others stand the test of time. A perfect example of the latter is Talisman, the magical quest game. First published in 1983, the same year as Warhammer Fantasy, it has almost continuously been in print since that time. My guest today is Bob Harris, the game designer responsible for the creation of Talisman and many of its early expansions. We talk about the design of the game, where the ideas came from, what it was like working with Games Workshop in those early days, and some of the game ideas that never got off the ground. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Talisman creator Bob Harris. Bob, thank you so much for joining me for a conversation about your amazing work on Talisman. I think a great place to start would be just where you first started gaming. How did you become a gamer in the first place?
Well, of course, in those nowadays you've got the differentiation between like board games and then computer gaming and online gaming. Although then the only games you had were things you put on a table. And so we're going back quite a long way now, without revealing too much about my age. I've been going back quite a bit of time now. There are no mobile phones or home computers or anything.
Hmm.
And so the earliest thing I remember about games was actually making my own version of Monopoly. Now, I don't remember having a Monopoly set. I must have played it somewhere. I made a much simplified version about my hometown of Dundee, so that all the places in it were actually, places in Dundee. And I must have made fake money to go with it. But I remember doing that, so I must have done that. That's my first step into making games was that. The game I remember playing most, and I still have it and still play it, is well, my mum and dad. I was an only child. Mum and dad used to take me. We used to go um, either go up through places in Scotland to camping, or we go down to camp outside Blackpool or Morecambe, a holiday place like that. And that they were staying there on the street. We go and do all the holiday things there. And on one of these trips, we used to bring along occasionally bring my cousin George along. He was my age, so I'd have some company. And the dog's barking now. I can But anyway, yeah. So we picked up this game called The Adventures of Bugs Bunny, which I still have, and I've been playing it for decades ever since. Where each of you is a Bugs Bunny character, and you've got a card for that, and you've got a spinner which moves you around the board. And there's four circles on the board, and there's things that say, Bugs and Elmer change. So you swap your identity with Elmer Fudd and you become a different character. So wherever you are in the game, there's no judgment or anything in it at all. But the fun of it when you're playing it with your student friends and then adult friends is pretending like you've got some control over it, even though it's all completely random.
Right.
And cursing when you're doing so well, and obviously you have to change a different character, and there's holes in the board, and you land on a space that's fell down a wabbit hole, and there's an actual hole in the board. And you go in there, and you sit in there, and have to roll something to get out. And so it's that thing where it's fun because it's Bugs Bunny, and it's got all
Hmm.
these kind of elements to it. And is just that kind of non-competitive aspect where it doesn't really matter. You've no control over it. And so I've introduced people to that university, and everybody loves it. It's a really beaten and battered thing now, and you probably couldn't get a new copy. But just the sheer fun of that. So that is the game I remember playing most in my childhood, playing it in a tent at some point because we were going camping, then playing it at home with friends from school, and then university I brought along, and people just got into it as well, playing that. So, beyond that, I'm not remembering that many games, that I played because this is a while back now.
Sure.
Then we get into my teenage years when I went to school. That's when I actually started. Well, that's when I started getting into game, more into like the postal diplomacy
Hmm.
and making my own games and beyond that. So that at school, so I've told before about where Talisman comes from. I made a board game called Rectocracy because the rector was the title of our school, Morgan Academy in Dundee. And I was a few years ago. I was invited to do a speech at the prize giving, so I have to tell them about my experiences. at school, which was actually kind of dull because I was a really nerdy kid. And then I was a member of the bridge club. We went along and we learned to play bridge. I mean, that's a wasted teenage years. But I became cooler later on. But I made Victocracy, in which you competed to become the head of our school, the rector, and that had the kind of like the standard Monopoly thing with the squares outside, and that's it. Um, but I didn't think you could move in either direction, which is a variant on that. And then more sections inside. So you started off as a teacher on the outside, and you gained prestige points as you went along from various things. I'm sorry the game's lost because it'd be fascinating to have it out again and play it, but it's lost somewhere. I don't know what ever happened to it. And then when you got enough points, you became a head of department, so you got to move into the next circle, you head of department. And then you finally got enough points, you could go into the rector's office and demand that he resign and let you take over the school in his place. Tremendously realistic, of course. And all that happened then was you rolled a die, and if you rolled a four, five, or a six, he succumbed and left, and you took over. Or you rolled a one, two, or a three, he simply kicked you out, and you had to start the game all over again as the janitor. And the janitor of the school, the advantage he had, although he was lacking various things, he had a dog he could set on people. And some of the teachers had special abilities, like the gym teacher could actually move extra spaces and such like. And you could put booby traps in rooms to electrocute people. And the chap who was in charge of the school cadet corps had three cadets he could send in rooms ahead of him to die in his place. So there were the beginnings of the kind of special abilities, and the fact that you're working way towards the center of the board was there. But this was not something one could imagine actually trying to publish anyway. And I made a card game called Gibbon, which, because we used to listen to, I'm sorry, I'll read that again. It's a radio show back then, which you can probably get if you go on YouTube or something, you can probably find it now.
Mm.
And there used to be a lot of stuff about gibbons in that. So I made this card game, Gibbon, where you had to match gibbons with bananas or get three gibbons and with other things like the teacher, a geography teacher we imagined was a vampire. And so you had to match him with a coffin, or you get three of him and three coffins. And you had cards and special things. There was a card that was a cheesy grin and a blank stare. And once again, this is just lost. I just wish I had it to get out again. It'd be fascinating because I'm meticulously drawing all these things by hand, and I mean, so playing with my friends at school. So so my memories are more vivid of actually making games than of playing them.
Mm.
Something when I got into doing role playing games, I find I preferred actually running them, being the games master for things, rather than being a player. I actually enjoyed setting up games for other people.
Right.
So yeah, so I was playing games obviously from a young age because otherwise I wouldn't be making them. And but what they were, and then of course we did war games when I was at high school. I'd done a war games club,
Right.
and my favorite story about that is that we had like Greek and Roman armies, and some of the guys had Napoleon. I don't know, so we had all these things. We had books of tables you had to look up and everything. And so we were one evening we were doing it was in a community centre in Dundee, and some sort of slovenly street kids. I mean, not that they were probably, I mean, I would have a poor family. They seemed to be just slouching around the streets looking for something to do. So a bunch of them came in. They weren't really unpleasant. They were like, "What is this? What are you toy?" And so we were explaining to them, well, you roll these dice and you've got a ruler to move the figures, and you look up these tables, and I mean, we explained it all. And this girl who was chewing gum just looked at us and made this existentially destructive statement. She just said, "So what does it prove?" And this is it. All human endeavor was reduced to this. What does it prove? Well, it doesn't prove anything. We just kind of enjoy doing it. She went, "Oh." So you just thought, yeah, she's right. Why are we doing this? So interestingly, we did a lot of ancient wargaming, and my friend Steve and I, who did this, we developed our own rules of playing Lord of the Rings because we were reading Lord of the Rings at this time.
Right.
So probably perhaps simultaneous with Gary Gygax and his friends, we had made our own Lord of the Rings rules to play Lord of the Rings battles. But of course, did not have the ingenuity to actually parlay it into a money-making business. But we had the same idea of doing that originally. And yeah, so that's the early days of my gestation of that. Also, I was writing stories and making comic books. none of which I thought of as a future career of any sort. Making games, writing stories, nah, which of course what I've been doing for years now, and being paid modestly for doing it, but getting paid at all for doing that kind of stuff is actually kind of nice.
Hmm.
It all eventually blossomed into a sort of garden of weeds.
So, am I right in thinking then, because you have written in your sort of biography online that you then
Hmm.
went to university, and that's where you first encountered the Dungeons and Dragons that Gygax was developing, and started
Yes.
playing those kind of role playing games. Is that right?
Yeah, most of the game I did, well, we played Risk a lot with friends. We all chipped in to buy a Risk set. And we had very competitive. The guy who hold himself up in Australia every time. You just hated him. He just hold himself up and then just build armies, and he only had one route in. So we played that a lot. And I was playing Postal Diplomacy at that point.
Hmm.
And just recently, somebody sent me an email saying all these Postal Diplomacy magazines are now available online. Probably people are still doing it, using magazines to
Right.
do these things rather than just doing it all online. Because I think diplomacy must be much easier if you just email people and lie to them by email rather than deceiving them by a long letter. Do you have to do? You have to write a letter to somebody saying, "Oh, well, look, if you don't attack me here, I will guarantee not to attack you there."
Hmm.
And you have to have weeks for the letter to go out, and then you attack them just like you had lied about. And there were Lord of the Rings variants of that, and we used to write press releases which started off as like propaganda statements, but they morphed into vast stories about characters you were making up, and so I sent a link to the website where all these things apparently have all been scanned up, and I haven't got around to it yet, but I'm very keen to go back and read some of them
Yeah.
stories because there was one game, a Lord of the Rings game, we were just deadlocked. Three of us were like deadlocked for like a couple of years and churning out all these press release stories about what was going on. So that was the kind of gaming thing then, which had that kind of imaginative thing. It was going beyond the tactics of the tactics and sneakiness of playing diplomacy
Hmm.
into that. I played some real diplomacy as well. We had face-to-face diplomacy, and we had conventions. I remember we're in Preston with some guys who had a flat above an antique shop they ran. And we were supposed to go to a bigger place, but the guy who was hosting that suddenly was an illness in his family. So somebody saved it by saying, "You can come and do it in our flat." So like 30 of us packed into this flat. And then at lunchtime, we'd nip down to the pub down the road and eat Cornish pasties and bring out board games. I mean, the locals are all looking at us, what is this? And we'd play diplomacy and other games for the weekend. So it was like weekends of mad gaming. Um, and so the first I heard of Dungeons and Dragons was it was a guy. He was like a friend of a friend. He was in the university's war games club, and so I no longer was doing that stuff. But I used to play war games, as I said. We used to be in the war games club with all the tabletop figures and all that.
Hmm.
And I was asking him about what sort of wars he did. He said, "Oh, we played Dungeons and Dragons." So what's that? He said, well, you're sort of pretending you're going through a maze in a dungeon and you draw maps of it as you go and fight monsters. And I'm thinking, this sounds like absolute bollocks. I mean, you're supposed to have vast armies of painted Greek hoplites, clashing with Persians, vast, you're just piddling around with this stuff. Now you're so used to it. You imagine there were people describing it to you for the first time and you're thinking, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
What a total way. It's like that girl saying, well, what does it prove? Why are you doing this?
Sure. Yeah.
And so it was only when so that was my undergraduate days. And I came back to do postgraduate work in Latin, which didn't lead anywhere. But during that time, I met my wife and other things happened. But also, so we saw this thing where we'd all chip in for games and stuff. And she'd played Dungeons and Dragons in America. And there was a set on sale in the local toy shop. She said, "Look, we should all chip in for that, and we could all play it." So we did that, and it was a guy called Tony Kant, who was Australian, and he was a scientist, he was a physicist, and he was multilingual, and he was a massive fan of punk rock. He had a great collection of punk records, because that was what was going on at the time, and he'd played it sometime. So he was our first dungeon master. So a bunch of us went this first weekend playing Dungeons and Dragons virtually without sleep. You know, every time a character got killed, characters got killed, we'd be back at the tavern, rolling up new characters, go back in there, all get slaughtered again. We were just intoxicated with it. It was like nothing we'd ever done before. It was such a great fun.
Hmm.
And so then we went into playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I that's what started me thinking. Well, somebody's got to actually go to all the bother of setting all this up. I mean, you could buy the scenarios, but then somebody had to be running all. So wouldn't it be great if you just open a box and we could all play? I
Hmm.
think. Now, was it TSR who did Dungeons and Dragons, but a Dungeons and
Sure.
Dragons board game, which was just rubbish. It was utter rubbish. Every player had their own separate section of the board where they go around trying to kill monsters and get treasure. But there was no interaction between the players at all, which of course, in a role-playing game, a lot of the fun of it is the interaction between you and the other players,
Yeah.
your imaginary characters. So, for a couple other good games, there was Sorcerer's Cave and Magic Wood, which were designed by the same guy. And they were brilliant games. They had their limitations, though. Sorcerer's Cave involved joining bits of this cave together. You needed a vast room, and the thing would like expand out of control. And Magic Wood still was they were both similar system, but both very good games. But they seemed to disappear. I mean, I liked them, but they still didn't have quite the D&D sort of feel. And then I thought about adapting my game Rectocracy
Hmm.
to take that same idea of moving around the outer board and instead of being teachers, you'd be wizards and warriors and elves and trolls and things. And instead of gaining sort of points, you would gain strength and craft and all that kind of thing. And so I just started doing it by myself, just sitting, did it all in pencil so I could change it. All the cards were in pencil. And I was sitting there on the floor of my room and had my Paddington Bear, Tommy Paddington Bear there and a little plaster dog there. And I was playing with, dealing out the cards to everybody and doing it. And then first I started playing with people and it started to work. So this all came from my girlfriend at that time. My wife, it was her inspiration to do D&D. And so eventually it was so good. And the reason I think the game itself was so good is it was made for fun. It wasn't some games company thing, oh, we can make a bit of money out of this. It was just for us to have fun with. And so it was played. We played it lots and lots. So of course I kept honing it. It was like it's got this developmental thing was going on. And so by the time I actually sent it off to Games Workshop, it was really, really good shape. It had been
Hmm.
played, played, and played, and it really did work. Um, yeah. So there, we've come
Sure.
up to the creation of Talisman and in a rambling roundabout sort of way. But so
No.
once again, you keep giving me questions and
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so that version then. You said you sent it off. Did you create a second version to send, or did you literally send the version you guys were playing
no,
over
the
to
version we were
Workshop?
playing was still all in pencil.
Right.
And I realized that to send it to a company, you'd have to actually make it look better. And I found a company by buying a gaming magazine and looking for the adverts for games companies and Games Workshop, which like the previous year had been selling backgammon sets at the back of a van, basically. And they had four games out at the time, none of which survived very long.
Hmm.
I can't remember what they all were now. But I thought that they look like they're doing the kind of thing that would be right for me. So I had the address there and all this. And so I got lots of coloured pens and I made a board coloured all in and I did once again did all the art, all the drawings, which is on my website. You can link to see what it all looked like, the original. It was good enough, to do. So it looked good. Then I had to laboriously type up all the rules, with typewriters and Tipex and all that. People who who've got computers, they don't know they're born. I mean, if when you're doing it on a typewriter, you look back on that and you think, how it's like chiseling away in blocks of stone. You know, every mistake had to be corrected. So I typed up all the rules and I probably had carbon paper to make a copy. And so I sent that off to them with a cover letter. I just didn't know who they, well, here it is. You're interested in publishing this. And within a matter of weeks, so once again, there's no email. This is all come by letters. A letter arrived saying, "What are you doing this? You want to come down and talk to us about it?" So I went down there, and there was Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson, a couple of other guys who, if I thought hard, I'd remember the names. And we had a go playing. The picture I think I've got online somewhere above me playing it with them in this
Sure.
warehouse that they were in at the time, and they were really keen to do it. Very quickly we had we'd signed a deal, which they offered me a small lump sum just for the rights to the whole thing, or a royalty, a modest royalty for every copy sold. So I took the royalty, um, which was modest, but of course, once the thing was selling globally, I was actually making a living out of it. I mean, I was making
Mm.
as much money as I would have made if I'd been doing a proper job, and without actually doing a proper job. But I got on very well with those chaps, and we had our games day launch then with my now my wife and some friends, and at McDonald's queuing up by guys in Viking armor to get burgers and things. So they were all this, and I was actually quite a bit hungover because I was in some friends down in Islington, and there's a pub there where they were still using old pre-decimal money. And we drank there a lot. My God, we drank a lot. And then so I was staggering into games day next day to launch my game. And I've not seen it. All I got were some crude photocopies of the rules. I know I didn't see a copy of the game until we actually got there for the launch, and I was given a copy of it. And yeah, so I got I ran into Ken St. Andre, who created Tunnels and Trolls, which at that point I was using Tunnels and Trolls as the basis for role-playing games that I was running. Because I kind of liked the dice system, and I'd adapted it quite a bit. But I got him to write on the rules for that first Talisman game, the best fantasy role-playing board game in the world, Ken St. Andre. So it was quite a thrill to be down there doing all that. Yeah, and that was the beginning of it, where it was going. But I remember one of the things I remember when I was talking to the guy when we were first playing and discussing it at Games Workshop. And I said, the way it's been designed, you could add expansion sets to it. And they laughed. The notion that you'd add expansion sets to a board game. But of course, in those days, it was actually quite radical. I mean, now it's like, you've got to have extras to
Sure.
it. But then it was quite funny. But of course, I honestly have lost track of all the versions of Talisman, but
Sure. Yeah, I'm not
I did
surprised.
a few years back. I did get invited to the local, the University's Gaming Society to play Talisman with them, and they had the full thing, all the corners that had extra boards on everything, big tower in the middle with a dragon on it and stuff. So I had a great time playing it, but it's the only time I've ever actually played the full panoply of things. When I've played, I generally just play the old version, the board, because or maybe one or two of the expansions that I designed, because there's only so many hours to do this.
Sure.
So that takes us up to
Sure.
yeah, putting the work in to make it look decent,
Yeah.
to show what it could look like a professional version, and sending it off. And it's like, it seems almost too easy. The first company I sent it to said, "Yeah, we want to do that," and they grew over the next few years, and Talisman grew with them,
Hmm.
and so I did very well out of that, and so did
Yeah.
they.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, because there were a couple of changes, I believe, at that point as well, right? When you were developing it for the sort of the published version. So one is the name, because it
yeah, oh
was
yes, yes.
Necromancer, is that right?
I called it Necromancer, which they
Right.
thought was a bit evil sounding.
Right.
So they came up with the name Talisman, which is fine because you've got the thing. Well, I can't remember what it was called now. The thing that you had to collect was called something else. But they called
So
it
the
a
Crown of
token.
Command.
Well, the current plan was I think at the beginning, but the token you needed to get in there
Right.
was actually called something else at the time. And they called it a talisman and made the game Talisman, which is like that's what they're supposed to do. They're a games company. And so they got, really good artwork and all that done. But in the first edition, the cards were all in black and white. And then it was a massive thing when they thought, man, we could spend a bit more and make the cards all in color. That'd be just deluxe then. Because once again, they were quite a small company then, and this was a whole new thing. And the things that would be different from in the original version of the game, because it was quite big. It's
Mm.
about, this size. And so the cards are all laid out face down on the spaces on the board, which was specific cards are actually on there. So basically, they're like 2 cards or 3 cards, they're all on there. So it was kind of nice. They were sitting there waiting for you You know, what is there? And so you had a character that Prophet as well. You could actually look at some of the cards and something, which once you got them in a deck that you draw, which is more practical probably for making a compact version of it. That changed how some of the things worked, but not in a drastic way.
Mm.
The big thing they changed was that the mines and the tunnels, I think it was in the center bit. Um, I had it that you had to roll to get through them, with your strength in one craft and another. And however much you'd fallen short of what you need to get, you spent those number of turns just sitting there. But then you'd get through to the island in the center, which was the Necromancer's Isle in the original version. And they thought people didn't want to be sitting around doing nothing for turn
Mm.
after turn. And so they had the thing where instead of that, if you didn't make the target roll, you were bounced out to the to the game again, which is why it took a long time to play because if you sit for like 5 turns in a mine and you're through, you're actually in the center. People want to get to the center for the game to end. If they're
Mm.
constantly being bounced back out again, it could take a long time. So whenever we've played it, with friends and that, we always use my original rule because that way the game will actually end in a finite amount of time.
Sure.
And yeah, so those are the things that the major change from. Other than that, it's very much as I designed it, how the game worked. Um,
I mean, I haven't seen your original, like the card that you drew for the talisman itself. Like that, you already had the sort of triangular shape design,
yeah, it's
right?
a charm. It's called a charm, remember?
Charm,
It's a
yes.
triangular thing. So they took that.
Yeah. So
And
I'm just curious about that because it's such a it's. I mean, obviously it's become so iconic with the
yeah,
game. Do you remember where that
it was
came
just
from? Like as a shape,
no,
as
it's
a
just an easy shape.
right? Okay.
And yet it became like a nice symbol for
Yeah.
the whole thing. So it's just a good fortune in a way that things tend to work out. And Talisman was a great name for it, better than
Mm.
Necromancer. And yeah, we well, I don't really get into the behind the scenes highlight over things, but there were some disputes over what rights I had to the material in the game
Right.
concerning computer versions and everything else. And so we had a bit of a dispute about that, which Livingston said, okay, well, we'll just agree. You have a royalty for everything to do with it. At that point, they of course had no idea what was going to happen. That there were going to be expansion sets and there were going to be figures, and so I got all the figures that were made. I got a percentage of the sales of all the little metal figures that went with it.
Right.
Every expansion set, I got a percentage of that, even though I didn't design it, because everything had been conceded that everything to do with the game of Talisman, I got my cut of it,
Mm.
which was great. So, and then of course there was overseas licensing. That's when things really started to take off.
Sure. Yeah.
When I check, I think from Games Workshop and said, "This is your share of the advance money from France and Germany for licensed versions of Talisman." And I sat down in the step, looked at it, and thought, "This is this." Well, I said to my wife, "I think we're rich now." Rich is like not living in poverty. The rich is a relative thing. Rich
Mm.
means you can afford to eat out occasionally.
Sure.
You can pay the rent without struggling. And yeah, it was up to making an actual living out of it. During which time I was making coming up with the expansion sets.
Mm.
Now, so let's talk about the expansion set, how that all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
so that it was doing well enough that I don't know how often I went down to see them, but at some point they were saying we were thinking you could do an expansion set, maybe an extra board to go with it. And I thought, okay, so oh no, I'd already done the first expansion set with just more characters and more cards and stuff, and and doing that was interesting because I thought the characters for that were better than the characters in the original game. It was like having had a break from the whole thing, and my brain was coming back to it afresh. And I can't remember who was the originals and who were the expansion set. But the expansion set I was so pleased with all the stuff I could come up with. It was actually easy to add a whole bunch of new characters and cards and all that to it. And that was quite successful. They made something called Talisman the Adventure without consulting me. I still got my share of money for it, which is kind of stupid because it was full of mistakes. I think, well, you're paying me money for these things. You've just sent it to me just to proofread it. I could have sorted these things out that actually were flaws that went into the game. But that's business. The business is a kind of there was a time when I was a callow youth. I thought people who ran businesses were all hyper intelligent and really. No, they're not. They make terrible mistakes and misjudgments and things. So they said we thought maybe we could add an extra board to it. You think you could do that? I said, yeah. So I came up with the Talisman Dungeon, which was a nice idea because it's at the side, but the idea is it's under the land and it links in, and you can and the movement around it was good. And you pop it, and that was quite a bit of work to make that fit in without ruining the game by making it unbalanced in any way, and that worked out really really well. Um, so that after that, like then that was like, oh well, the expansion set sold really really well. And of course, that helped them more interest in the game. The game could keep being renewed by adding stuff to it, not just adding more characters and cards, but actually adding sets.
Mm,
So then they did the Talisman Timescape, which you
sure.
mentioned in your notes that you sent to me, which I had nothing. Once again, there were bits and I thought it could have been better. But I thought, well, yeah, I mean, it's fine. I mean, it's not part of the kind of real mythos of the world of Talisman. But it's like, so what?
Sure.
If people enjoy playing it, and they had the Chainsaw Warrior in it, and which was one of the things that Stephen Hand who created that game. I mean,
Mhm.
I was down there for a games day and got to hang out with the guys who were designing stuff, and he designed that. And he designed The Fury of Dracula, which I thought was a brilliant game. I loved Fury of Dracula.
Yeah.
We had a great time talking about creating games and how, when your head is filled, all the ideas are coming to you and it's like your brain's expanded. You're on another level, it just heightens your consciousness in a way because you've got all these ideas, things swirling around. And I remember he was talking about how Chainsaw Warrior, he'd called it 0 hour, but they thought, well, no, it'll appeal more to the frothers who buy their games if we could make it all about chainsaws, Chainsaw Warrior. So this quite clever little game about going through a building and all this kind of stuff. But chainsaws were inserted into it for marketing purposes. So yeah, and at that point when I was down there for a games day event, and this was the first time I was there with Talisman fans.
Mm.
People who when you're rolling things are going toad, 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 and they were buying me drinks afterwards and everything. And it was great. That's my first experience of being semi-legendary. That I'd done this thing that people just loved. And I remember I was my wife's from Florida, so we were over in the States visiting over there. And I was in a game shop there and saw somebody buying a copy of Talisman. I was like, I'd have the nerve to go and say, I just, but it's quite a thrill to be there and see somebody buying my game. And so, of course, yeah. So the growth of it was quite phenomenal. And but some people might recall that when it was reviewed in the White Dwarf magazine, it got a really lukewarm review. Because, well, yeah, it's okay. I mean, if it's raining outside, you could play this and it would pass a couple of hours. After that, they abandoned the policy of independent reviews of the product in their own magazine. But that didn't seem to matter because people playing it really loved it, and word got out, and it was like. It just spread and became really popular, which is great. So I've rambled on a bit, so I'll let you rein things in and ask a proper question about something.
Sure. I mean, it's fascinating to hear that because obviously, and you mentioned like it started to get international
Mm.
appeal as well, right? I mean, that like as a creator, that must just be quite satisfying to know that people are engaging with something you've built and made, and it is
Well,
growing in
yeah.
reputation.
I mean, sorry, I've got a website which my wife shares with me because she's also a writer, although she's kind of retired from writing and just edits me, which is harder work probably. But some friends set up a website for us years back, was the first time we were actually able to have email and people could actually contact me about
Mm.
Talisman and send me emails. And I didn't really click on and send with some guy. He sounded quite tough. He said, I don't have total respect for many people, but I do for you because you created Talisman. Thanks. Oh, great. And I got a beautiful email from a lady in Poland, which I still got preserved. And she said, when I was a little girl, my father took me into a toy shop to ask what I wanted for like St. Nicholas Day. She was and I saw this game up there. And I pointed, I want that. And she said, I was kind of lonely. My life was a sad. I used to sit and play it myself and get lost in this wonderful world. So I want to, now I'm grown up, I want to write to you and thank you for this sort of magical world you give me. I was virtually in tears reading that. And that's not the only one I've had. I'd a letter from an email from a woman more recently. She'd met her husband playing Talisman, and they'd raised their children on Talisman and everything. Once again, it was like very, very moving. It meant so much in people's lives, like a favorite song or a favorite film or a favorite book. Talisman had that sort of role in people's lives. It, it,
Mm.
it bonded them together. They made friendships over it. They got married. I've been sent a picture of a Talisman themed wedding cake, which has
Wow.
got all the kind of characters all over.
Amazing.
So somebody had a Talisman wedding, so although I have no direct say in the game anymore now, not for some time. I just love the fact people still love it, I really, when people write to me so much it means to them, I really appreciate that. They don't have to do that. Saying people write to me about the books I write and say, "Ah, the book was so great," And there was one of my Sherlock Holmes novels. Some guy wrote to me and said that was the highlight of my summer reading that book. I thought, well, that's really nice. So I think, I'm not selling weapons or advertising, cigarettes or anything. I'm actually doing something that makes people happy, and it's harmless and it's brought me a lot of pleasure. So,
Mm.
if I should ever die, you know, I think Talisman will go on forever now. I mean,
Mm.
it's been going for so long now. By the time it wasn't around, it looked like it might just die off like everything else. But then it came back, and now it looks like it's just like Monopoly and everything else. It looks like
Absolutely.
it's immortal now. There's so many variants of it, and I only have some of them. I believe there's a Batman version, a Harry Potter version, like a Star Wars version. I haven't even looked. I haven't got any of those. I think, I couldn't find time to play them all. So, I think, well, that's amazing. That's a kind of immortality.
Mm.
And so, like, you contact me to do this. That's really nice that people say, well, the guy that created this thing, it's kind of, it wasn't made by some company. They didn't all get together and say, let's make something that'll exploit people's love of Dungeons and Dragons. And in fact, just recently, I've been invited, and I look forward to this, to a fantasy convention in Poland in June to go and talk about Talisman and play Talisman with people there. Which you think is just amazing. And even said, "Oh, you can bring a companion if you like." So my wife's going to come along as well, so she's looking forward to that. Never been to Poland, but Talisman in Poland they did their own art. They gave it a different name, and they did their own artwork for it, which is quite
Sure.
unusual. And also, my first solo novel, Leonardo Death Machine, was published in Poland as well. So I've got stuff in Poland, I've got
Yeah.
that connection. So I'm looking forward to that. But it's like people think it's worthwhile they're paying my plane fare and putting me up and feeding me for a few days because of Talisman. So it's like, yeah, I guess it is that thing. And it's nice that people think, yeah, it kind of matters who created it. Yes, Games Workshop brought in the artists and all that, but basically it's still the game I created originally. And the whole notion of doing expansions to it, I did that originally and had planned it that way. And people have up and run with it. So hopefully lots of people have contributed now. What's out there now, people have made expansions and alternate versions and all sorts of things, which is what you would want, really, rather than it just be, oh, we're so tired of playing this Talisman game, let's just do something else. You know? So yeah, so it's very, very gratifying that it's so phenomenally successful.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, and it is amazing. I think you're right in that I would say it's joined that pantheon with
Mm.
Monopoly and Risk and those other games
Mm.
as well. It
Yeah,
absolutely stands alongside those. And
yeah.
there have been so many iterations. There have been so many generations of people who have played it. It is
Mm.
part of people's lives and childhood. So I'm
Mm.
not surprised that there's still that love, like because it's been enormously popular, hasn't it?
Yeah, and people have like grown up playing it, and now
Yeah,
they're playing it with their children.
yeah,
Well, yeah, which is great heritage, to do that. I think, well, that's really wonderful. And I'd had a couple of things recently. Somebody asked me to do something for a talisman present for a wedding. It was a chap in America. His best friend and part of that friendship was playing talisman together. And he'd managed to make a fake card. He slipped into the cards, and it was called the Bond of Brotherhood or something. And on this card, it said, you've been my best friend for years, and you always have my back, except when we're playing Talisman. So would you please be the best man at my wedding? And so the guy kind of the best man emailed me and he said, look at this guy's made this. Could you possibly do something for the wedding? So I made a scroll, which with a picture of me dressed as Odin from my days of doing school visits, and made a scroll of the spell of binding about how the happy couple would be, together. And so he sent me a photograph afterwards of him and the couple with the framed copy of this, which is hanging in their marital home. And somebody else asked me to do a big Talisman fan for this guy. It was his 50th birthday. Could you do a video for him? So I did that. I dressed up again a bit. I had my magic staff. I delivered this message and wished him all the best for his birthday. And they sent me a video of him seeing it, which was exciting and all that. So yeah, that's just nice. It means something to people. And occasionally, someone will ask me, "Can you do something for them for that?" And I think, well, yeah, I'm very pleased to do that. Although I appreciate if they could maybe give me an Amazon voucher or something for doing this.
I was
Right.
curious.
So
Oh, well, I was curious about the world of Talisman as well. So the actual setting obviously draws on a lot of inspirations. Like you talked about D&D, you talked about Lord of the Rings. It is that classic fantasy world,
yes.
but you expanded it and explored it. I mean, did you ever want to go anywhere else with that world and to sort of take it into other spheres to write stories, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's very generic. It's a generic D&D world. So the characters don't have names or anything like that. Uh, um, um, so, well, now I have designed a number of games since then, rather than trying to do more with Talisman. I mean, at one point in Talisman, they had the idea we could make it into a quartet of different games that would all match. I mean, I worked on that with Games Workshop World, but I don't think it ever really gelled. And it was after that they started to move over to do a lot of Warhammer. They kind of lost interest in Talisman to an extent. And then we had some discussion because we'd signed different contracts for different bits of it about who actually had the rights to it. And eventually, I don't want to get into details about all the behind the scenes stuff that goes on, but eventually I got the upper hand in this by just being very ballsy over the phone. And they realized they made a bit of a misstep and conceded far too much to me. And so somebody who must have taken over their light swarm and just said, this is a catastrophe. And so offered me a nice sum of money for the rights. And at this point, the game wasn't even being published at that point. It was making no money or anything. And they offered me quite a bit, to me, a fortune, to some people, and what it makes now. Nothing. But on that, we were financially secure for a few years. Took the family to a fabulous holiday in Florida. That's me and my wife, 3 kids. And we had an amazing time. So, it's like, say, well, but if you still had a say in this, you'd be making a fortune from this now. Well, maybe not. I mean, I don't regret it. I mean, I needed the money at the time. I got good use of it. But without me being attached to it, probably made it easier for them to license it to various different companies and things. I mean, without my cut being involved, that would probably have slowed it down a bit. And so I'm happy. They paid me what I thought was a decent sum of money for the rights to the thing, which was virtually worthless at that point. And I had great fun with it, got a use out of it. And people have kept on loving the game and still recognizing me as the guy who created it. And I create other games, none of which were published professionally.
Right.
So the talent. I should talk a little bit about Mythgardia. Well, with Talisman, what I did after that, we'd been to see, I think, the second Indiana Jones film, and when I'd wished there was a kind of a D&D board game that you could play, and so I made it. I thought, wish there was an Indiana Jones game you could play, a sort of 1930s adventure game. So I made one. And I called it Cliffhanger, and it was very different from Talisman. It was a map of the world that you moved around, and you had all kinds of adventures and things in it. And you had characters based on Doc Savage and Indiana Jones, different names on that. But there was kind of pulp fiction characters. and sent that to Games Workshop, and they liked it, but the movement was a bit slow, so I tweaked the movement rules, so that was fine. So they kind of liked that, but they thought, well, what we think it would only sell if we got an Indiana Jones license for it. So they tried to get an Indiana Jones license and didn't get it, so they lost interest. Then I kind of thought, well, I woke up at 4 in the morning when my best ideas come out. Oh, well, I could just take the thing and make it into a fantasy game. So
Hmm.
instead of being a map of the world, I made up this fantasy world, which is based upon the role-playing games I was running at that point in a world I called Aldergard. And so I made this game called Legends, and I sent it off them, and they loved it. And so we signed a deal. It did not involve an advance, sadly, but I wasn't smart enough for that in those days. But then they were moving more and more over to just doing exclusively doing Warhammer. And this is before, I sold off the rights to Talisman. I was still it's a
Hmm.
Talisman at this point. And so that just kind of fell by the wayside. So I at various times was in talks with other companies to do this because it was a fantastic game. And part of the point of this is relating to how you were talking about expanding Talisman was
Hmm.
that in this game, the characters all have names. They're all actual characters. They have background stories. They have background stories interconnect with each other and with the world they're in has villains and characters in it. So it had that kind of more of a story aspect, um, whereas than Talisman does when Talisman does this D&D thing. This is kind of more like you're in a fantasy novel, and the way that people, when you're playing role-playing games, when we started off, it was pretty basic. You're going in dungeons and killing things.
Hmm.
But as we went on, we expanded them to more interesting adventures with whole cities, and the characters would be ongoing characters having adventures, and other characters would turn up and all this. So I put that into this game. So it went on and on and on, and then nothing. I mean, God, I was with Gibson's game. It's back and forth for ages, looking to adapt it to suit the kind of family market they wanted, and then other colors. And it gets quite tiring.
Hmm.
And eventually, though, I thought what I could do was hand make half a dozen copies and sell them for like 100 quid each on eBay or something as collector's items. He's a game uncle would come out the weather. But a friend of mine who's very good at being efficient, she we were having a kind of Easter barbecue. It's when you back about 2008 or something, 2007. I don't know. Anyway, she'd been to see, I'd asked her for advice about how to best print up this stuff, to produce these things myself. And she'd been to see a local printer. And she came back with all the facts and figures, what it would cost to actually print, so it'd be a box and all that would be printed and all that. And so we did that. The whole story is not anywhere online, but it was quite would have been a great reality TV show, us doing this. Because I thought, well, okay, I'm always getting emails from Talisman fans. I mean, all I need is about 100 of them
Hmm.
to want a copy of this, and that's it. So I could actually market it online. So I had to I revamped the game. I had to come up with a name for it because Legends wasn't a good game. I so I was the thing is there are so many role-playing board games, computer games, live action games. All the fantasy names have been used. I'd come up with, I'd Google them and say, oh, that's this computer game. Oh, that's a live action role playing. And finally came up with Mythgardia. I typed in Mythgardia. It said no match is found. I thought, yes, that's such a great name for it. So we made it and we sold 100. And then we sold another 50 on top of that. And then we did an expansion set, sold a bunch of those. But it was just too much hard work. I mean, we couldn't make it to make it that it would be as solid as in its components as a professional used game. We'd have to have had we'd have to invest so much money in it, more money than I could gamble with on that. As it was, people all chipped in to do this version of it. So, and every now and again, so that we did that and stopped because it was like, there was no way to make that a realistic thing. It was nice to have done it. And people who bought it and played it loved it. We got fantastic reviews online, people saying how great it is. So, and I was in talk once again. I was in talks with company after that. And I think, but now I had a much better version to show. My wife did all the artwork for it, and so it got a bit of a buzz. But then it was like just get over them. So anyway, more recently, I was contacted by some guys in America. Now I can't go into detail because things are kind of in flux just now, so I can't go into a lot of detail about it.
Hmm.
But A contract was signed and there's been development work done on it. Due to fluctuating printing costs and things, the future of the thing has sort of wobbled quite a bit.
Right.
But it's got wholly revamped, professional looking artwork. It all looks great. It shouldn't take much to get it to go to a printer or do it online. So I did say to some of the guys, well, I'll mention this in your podcast and the millions of people who are watching this. And anybody out there who has the resources to go into a partnership on this would like to be involved in it not just say, oh, I'd buy a copy. No, that's not enough. It needs something a bit more. And there's still various prospects out there.
Mm.
I'm hoping it'll come out because enough being invested in it in terms of new artwork, and I've come up with all kind of notions of how we'd expand it in the future and all that. So it was going to be coming out, but that kind of fell through. So it's Mythgardia is there. It's kind of like quite a long way along. It's so we're kind of looking for ways to get it to that next step. To either
Sure.
have it as a board game that people could just actually buy, and possibly also an online version of it. If anybody out there watching this wants to invest vast sums of money in this, or has a games company you think would like to do that, or something like that, yeah, get in touch. If you get in touch with you, pass it on to me, or
Sure.
contact me through the website, and
Yeah.
maybe something will just click. Um,
Well,
uh,
you'd hope so, because
you
there's, I mean,
know,
if it's that close as well. I mean, would you guys ever consider like a crowd funding approach, like
that
a
was the original
Kickstarter or?
idea. Then they weren't sure that they could match the increased printing costs, which have gone up
Right.
due to tariff wars
Of
and
course.
such like, which has hit a lot of things.
Yeah.
So the original estimates were kind of thrown off by all that. So it's things are kind of wobbly just now, but quite a
Right.
lot of work and a bit of money's been invested in it at this point. Not by me. I mean, I've done some work on it, and all that, but I've not spent my money on it. But yeah, it now looks great. The artwork they've got for it, looks fantastic, and it's a brilliant game to play. I mean, it's just a really great game. So and I think people who love Talisman would love this too.
Sure.
So it's just been a kind of I don't get frustrated about things, I don't worry about it, but it's like, yeah, it's kind of a bit frustrating that it's not out there. It's
Sure.
not I'm looking to make a fortune out of it. I just love it to be out there and people playing it and enjoying it. Because this is like, it's been, God, how many years, decades now, it's been in existence in different forms. And it's like, if only people could just get it
Mm.
and play it. I'd be so happy about that. Like I'm with Talisman. I can make no money out of Talisman now, but it makes me so happy people are enjoying it and that they'll contact me about it. So, yeah, that's where we are. It kind of takes off from your question about developing Talisman.
Sure.
Instead was to make another game that
Yeah.
would do something a bit different, but like Talisman be expandable, could be added to and all that, but would have the sort of a storytelling richness to it. Whereas, I mean, probably Talisman, I'm sure they make up their own backgrounds to characters
Mm.
and stuff and all that.
Oh
But
yeah.
where this comes with it with its world, which I think is a really colourful one and full of humour and such like. So, and people can see on my website, there's a link to the original version of Mythgardia, where you can see the game we produced back in about 2008 and 9. And if I could have just kept making those and doing it, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work
I
making them.
imagine it would be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you had to sort all the cards out and glue the boxes together, and you had to pad them, and all this. And I had plans for doing further versions of it. It'd be easy to do, but I thought, well, no, it's just too much. We've got this now to offer to professional games companies.
Mm.
We've got a finished version. You look at this thing, yeah. If the box was a bit less flimsy, and the
Sure.
artwork was ramped up a bit, and all of it, the board wasn't just on a folded bit of thick paper. It would be fantastic. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as I say, because there's other people involved in it, I can't go into too much detail about the whole
Sure.
thing. I did check here one of the guys, and he said yes. If you mention that, we'd be happy to have anybody who could in some way maybe enter a partnership with it or had the resources to move it along. So if they contact me directly to my website or you and send it on to me, and I'll contact them and say, well, but as I say, it's not a matter of, oh, I buy a copy of it. No, we need somebody who's actually
Sure. Yeah.
either
Like an
got a
actual
company who's
partner.
interested in working
Yeah.
on it, or has actually just got money to burn and would like
Mhm.
to burn some of it on promoting this, just invest it in this and see what happens. Because I'm sure once it got going, it'd be a great success when people actually had a chance to have their hands on it. They would just love it as much as they love Talisman.
Yeah.
And would go, it's also, you can play it in a much shorter time. The victory conditions are adjustable. You can play a game in an hour, or you can
Right.
extend it to 3 or 4. So you're not committing like an entire day
I
playing a
mean,
vast talisman game.
you
But
mentioned
something
that
like that.
the Games Workshop took a look at an early version of that, and then
Uh,
but before that, you'd mentioned there was almost an idea for a quintet of games or a quartet of games. Was that
Talisman
one of them?
Quartet.
Quartet.
No, there was going to be a Talisman Realm of Chaos and a Talisman City. So something like the City, which became an expansion set, which is going to be a
Right.
separate game. And I did designs for all of those. But it
Right.
kind of fell through. And once again, because they were going more and more towards Warhammer. They become a Warhammer company, which is
Sure.
still what they are, really, because they license Talisman elsewhere. And so I think, they bought me off, and I'm happy enough with that deal. And
Sure.
possibly that's just helped to extend the life of Talisman.
Yeah.
So the quartet games, there's probably, I don't know if I've got copies of any of that, but I'm not sure it was a really good idea to do. That was the idea that we should do it and work on it, and I put a lot of time into it. But nothing came of it.
Right.
Um,
I mean,
um,
Talisman Realm of Chaos sounds particularly interesting. So would
yeah,
that literally be like you're playing traditional Talisman, but you are in the Realm of Chaos instead of a
yeah, the,
fantasy
the
world?
bits on the board move around.
Oh wow.
That's what I remember of it. It's
Right.
a long time ago now.
Sure, sure, yeah.
But so yeah, and I've had other games I tried to sell to people, but they weren't really Games Workshop suitable games. There was a great game, a space game called Spaceways, and a barbarian invasion game called Attila, all of which were like looked at by companies. They're, well, that's really good, but it's not quite what we're looking for. And so we get to the point now where I got to the point where I could pitch a novel to a publisher
Mm,
and get it published
right.
much more easily than beating my brains in. But nice thing with having done with Guardia ourselves, it was tremendous fun to do it. Because I was doing all the marketing and right, and friends of ours were doing all the technical aspects of setting up templates online that could be printed off at the printers and gathering it all together and sending copies off to Australia and Canada and everything. And that was really exciting. So I'm glad we did that. And it meant we had a copy I could send off and say, look, this is it in a box. And you look at this now and you can see what it could look like. So there's various dead ends. I mean, it's alive, like the monster on Frankenstein's table. It just needs a bolt of lightning to just
Sure.
animate it. Where other things which are fun games that I made, and yeah, I think some would be easy to make, but if somebody had money, would want to say,
Mm.
I'll just bankroll. I met when in my writing career, I met a guy who writes golf books, and he's just got a rich patron.
Right.
This guy basically bankrolls the books. He pays him to write his golf books, and he pays them publishing. I wish somebody would do that with me. I'd say, yeah, well, any game you design, I'll just bankroll the whole thing. I'll make sure they get printed and marketed and all that. That'd be really great.
Well, I was meaning to ask you about your writing career as well, because that
Good.
obviously you moved across into writing novels, including like Sherlock Holmes stories and
Yeah.
things like that. I mean, how different is that as a discipline to games design?
It's very different. I mean, but to write professionally, you've got to knuckle down to it. It's like you can't just do it when you feel like it. I mean, games design is very bitty, but there's the same rush of thing when the ideas are coming, and when you're doing it. And then so the novel thing. I mean, the first thing I wrote, my wife, when she was still my girlfriend back then, we were both graduate students in St Andrews, and she was working on a fantasy novel. And I thought, I'll have a go at that. So I taught myself to type. I had a book called Type It Yourself by Brenda Rowe, and I taught you how to sit at the table, how your thighs would be parallel with the floor. And I learned to type. So I wrote it all out longhand. I was typing. And I was about 120 pages into it. It was a kind of sub-Tolkien fantasy novel. And I thought, that's not very good, actually, is it? So, it's not great, but I found that I could write it. It wasn't like I wrote 20 pages and ran out of ideas. Actually, I could develop a story. But then I left that because, and of course, after that, that was like pre-Talisman. So after that was the whole gaming thing. And then much later on, my wife had the book she's writing on was published and became a trilogy. And she had six novels of her own and seven in collaboration with Catherine Kurtz. And but what was a point where she got pregnant, and she had the book we plotted together. It's called Calendar of the Mists, and we plotted this book together. And the publisher wanted it, and they wanted to make it into a trilogy. And she was getting quite pregnant. She said, "Well, you have to help me because my." So I thought, okay, I'll pitch in and write. So I was writing, I was doing roughing out chapters for the books in that series. And a couple of, others with Catherine Kurtz, so bits where I would rough out the battle scenes and such like. And it was in one of these books that our friend Jane Yolen, who's a very dear friend and she's written about probably about 500 books now of novels and poetry books and picture books and all that. And we become really good friends with her. And she was talking about a bit in one of Debbie's books that she said was really, really good. And Deb said, "Well, Bob wrote that bit. Why doesn't he write his own books?" So she took me by the collar and getting me to writing some short stories. And my first few efforts writing with her were just awful. I mean, I was just rubbish at it. And then then we had one we were writing for a magazine called Requiem Antarctica. It was about bringing vampires into the Scott South Antarctic expedition. And I did the first draft of that, and it came out really well. And then she phoned me up and said, I should take my name off this. You've done such a good job with it. I'd finally managed to get it going. And she also thought we should write a novel together. And she had this idea for a book about, she'd a painting of this female jester of Mary Queen of Scots in a castle. And she let me agree it suit the kind of books that she wrote, but we could do it together. And I thought, well, that sounds nice. And publishers agreed to that because I was Scottish, so that kind of a nice selling point to it. And so we did that, and it was such hard work. It was really, really hard work writing that book. But the hardest thing I've ever to write, because Mary Queen of Scots was first Queen of France for a while.
Hmm.
She's like all about France and all about the people in France and the court. And then her husband died. She was kicked out and went to Scotland to become queen there. She had a whole other society, whole other characters and all that. And the book was just getting longer and longer.
Right.
And I said, can we maybe cut it off? No, no. And she said, publishers don't mind if it's a long book. Oh. So we did that. But it's very successful. It was a really big seller in the States, and did a follow-up, Girl in a Cage, about Robert the Bruce's daughter. And then we did a book of novels based on Greek mythology. So I wrote 8 books with Jane together. I learned a lot doing that. And she, I mean, she split the money was half and half between us, even though she was the senior writer and was selling on her name. She's just wouldn't have any other way that I would do that. So so I, so beyond that, I thought I did try and do something on my own. So I wrote my Leonardo da Vinci novel about the teenage adventure of Leonardo da Vinci, which was turned down by both our American publishers. One who had maybe revamp it a bit and then decided they didn't want to do it, even though I'd done all this work on it. And the other one just dismissed it completely out of hand. They thought it wasn't very Italian, and but then so eventually it ended up with Harper Collins in London, and they eventually said, "Oh yeah, we want to do that, and could you do us another book?" So I did a Shakespeare book for them, and so Leonardo was so basically I sold that book. Every novel, I've got my 14th novel coming out this year. Every one of those I sold myself. It wasn't an agent did it for me. I went to publishers myself and sold it. So there's a tip for people out there, because sometimes agents can be good or bad. And so the Leonardo, just recently, I've just signed a contract with Mondadori, who published the Italian version, to renew their rights to it for another 7 years. They've been publishing that for 20 years now, and it still sells in Italy.
Right.
So people said it wasn't very Italian enough. A huge success in Italy. It was also published in Poland,
Right.
quite a lot of countries. So I don't know if anybody, when I meet them over there in June, whether they're going to have copies of this. I'll try and take some of my copies with me, sign all that. So yeah, so I went on and then my career died, and then I came back as a children's writer, and then segued into being an adult writer. And it's great because for about 10 years, I always had another book coming up. They were all sold on outline. That I did an outline publisher. Yeah, I want to do that. They pay me in advance for it, of however much. And And so I knew I'd had money up front for it, and I knew it was going to get published. So I wasn't writing in the hope that somebody would want this book. And that was a great position to be in, always knowing what your next book was going to be. I'm kind of beyond that now, but I have great hopes for my new novel Crescendo, which is coming out in the summer in the UK and in the USA. So I hope that's going to be a massive global success and made into a film by Steven Spielberg. And yeah, then I
What's
can.
the pitch for Crescendo?
Um, it's uh, it's set in 1959. It's a Hitchcockian thriller. So Hitchcockian that Alfred Hitchcock's actually in it.
Right.
Um, I'd had the idea a few years ago for it when I was just anyway, how it came out. But anyway, it's set in 1959, and I did a bit of research on my basic idea of having a kind of a murder on the set of an Alfred Hitchcock film having to be investigated. So once I'd done all the work on it, I found a nice spot in 1959, where the idea of the book is that this is North by Northwest, which what people have all seen. It's a fantastic thriller with Cary Grant. It's just a big, glossy, fun thriller, and it's a massive success for Hitchcock. Like he could just make anything he wanted after that. And then reading about it, it's like I found out that in fact he had a project lined up after that, but it all fell through for whatever reasons, and he lost a lot of money on it. And because of that, he made Psycho because he didn't have any money. He had to finance his own film himself because no one would give him money anymore because this thing had fallen through. So he made Psycho in like 6 weeks using the people who made his TV show because they could make it quickly and cheap and in black and white. So as cheap as possible. And then Psycho becomes this massive global success, completely the opposite from what he did before. So my design, so I made up an imaginary film in between I won't go into detail about the actual film he had. He bought the rights to a book and was going to do that, and it all fell through. So I made up this film Crescendo, which is making. It's going to be even bigger than North by Northwest. It's going to just have everything. Raft chases down the Grand Canyon and people fighting on top of the Hollywood Bowl. And it's going to be just a vast extravaganza. But on top of the script, so he hires Bobby Burgoyne. Bobby Burgoyne is he's a struggling writer of detective stories. And he's keep using these to keep himself alive while trying to write his great American novel. But he's hired on the basis of the snappy dialogue of his detective stories to come and fix the script, finish the script for the film, because it's already been made. And the original screenwriter has walked off. He's had a falling out with Hitchcock and has just left. So Hitchcock has to find this guy and he brings him in. But the film's been plagued by a series of suspicious accidents. And eventually somebody dies as after one of those. Hitchcock presses our hero, Bobby, into investigating what's going on. And he said, "You write detective stories, sure you can do it." I said, "Yeah, I write the stories. I've known nothing about detective." So he starts investigating and decides that somehow there's something to do with the cheap, obscure novel that this film is based on. Hitchcock's got the rights for peanuts. And so he has to go and find the reclusive author of this novel, and find out what's behind it all. And that leads him to, murders and car chases and all sorts of things, and full of Hitchcockian moments of suspense and the rest of it. I was to make it very Hitchcockian and also like a classic American detective story with all the elements of that, with all the snappy dialogue and such like. So I actually had to dodge writing it for a while, but it was the only thing my publisher were interested in. I pitched them other things and they turned them all down. We were actually packing up to go. And I said, "Oh, I've got one more idea." I gave them the gist of the Hitchcock thing. They said, "Oh yeah, we could sell that. Do an outline for that for us." So I went home. I went back to my notes, which I could not get it to gel before, but I spent a week on it. I came up with a detailed outline, everything. It all fell into place. And so I'm really pleased. I think it's people read it. Don't know if people read it nice. It's the best thing I've done. It's and in a way it's interesting because I've written three novels about John Buchan's hero Richard Hannay, where I'm kind of channeling that character who's telling his own story. In my Sherlock Holmes novels, I'm channeling Dr. Watson to write as those books would have been written. But this was a wholly new thing. I had to develop a style of my own to do this. So that's it. I've also got I've written the first of a series of tech novels set in Scotland. I need to find somebody to force to publish it. So I've got plenty going on between all that. So I've got this book coming out. I'm going off to Poland in June, so that's going to be exciting. So the talisman thing just keeps going, and it's nice to just be doing it. Say, but if you had a talisman quiz or something, I would do really badly because I'm so behind the times now. I've got copies of the Talisman expansions that I haven't even opened
Right.
because it's fine when you're young and you haven't got children. You know, when when your gaming group all have children and they all go off and they move somewhere else. It's hard to get a gang out together to play things regularly. So, um, but yeah, so the writing gets me excited. So I walking my dog keeps me physically active, and writing keeps me mentally active. So hopefully I'm
Right.
good for the few years yet. But I'm having a fantastic time doing it, and I'm really excited about this new book and all the ones I've done so far. I mean, the Sherlock Holmes books have been very successful in America, and so I've got a plot for a third one of those. Which the idea of those being that I've taken the Basil Rathbone films of Sherlock Holmes, where they're set in the 1940s, the updated Sherlock Holmes,
Mhm.
to fight Nazi spies and such like. And I had the idea of thinking, well, that you could do that in a novel, couldn't you? You could do that. It's still be really Sherlock Holmes, but you make use that kind of version of Sherlock Holmes.
Mm.
And that was a great fun to do that because it kind of freed me up to do new things with it, while still being very true to Conan Doyle and the characters. So, but now with this, so I'm developing new characters of my own rather than stealing other other characters from dead authors and exploiting them. And I hope that we'll get Mythgardia will go and somebody will come along and say like, well, any game you design, I'll just bankroll it. It's
Yeah.
okay. Anything good enough for me that you made it,
Well, the call is out there now, Bo, isn't it?
Yes,
So
it's out there
if there
now.
is
So
anybody who's interested in that and who's watching this, then definitely get in touch.
nice to have the platform.
It has been absolutely terrific to chat, Bob. I really appreciate you finding the time
Hey, the
to.
time's flown by.
It
Yeah,
has. It really
it's
has.
time for lunch. We're both getting hungry.
Sure. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. Massive thanks to Bob. It was a real joy to chat about the creation of Talisman and the rest of your body of work. Really fun stuff. So thank you so much for taking the time. If you would like to find out more about Bob's other games, his other ideas, and his work as an author under the name Robert J. Harris, you can check out his website via the link in the description below. And if you want to go and find out more about Warhammer's history, you can check out patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery, where I share exclusive early content, interviews, articles, blog posts, lots of other fascinating stuff. There's a load of free content there as well if you are interested. It is your support that allows me to continue doing this work, researching and documenting the history of Games Workshop. So thank you for anything you could do to support it. Thank you once again to Bob. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.